Right after the strict COVID lockdowns lifted, Bhopal was a city holding its breath. The usual chaos of traffic and bustling markets had been replaced by a heavy, unnatural silence. We can see the physical remnants of this extreme isolation left right on the street. Look at this empty stretch of asphalt. Those painted white circles were designed to keep crowds apart, but during this brief window, they only highlighted how completely deserted the city had become. Navigating this quiet landscape was Roshni, an MBA student from Uttar Pradesh. She was used to living independently and had a long-standing habit of wandering the city by herself to clear her head. Under normal circumstances, exploring a densely populated Indian city offers a built-in safety net. There are always street vendors, or passing cars, or locals nearby. But with the crowds gone, that passive protection vanished. This massive drop in human activity created an environment where the usual rules didn't apply. The empty streets formed a physical and psychological vacuum, a space quiet enough for things we normally can't explain to easily slip through. The tension begins at exactly 5 a.m. Roshni steps out of her room, heading towards Sathani Ghat, a famous riverbank destination. The morning air is thick with a blinding, heavy fog, reducing visibility to almost zero. She flags down a ride. It's a standard, small electric rickshaw, exactly like this blue one. The passenger cabin is cramped, forcing her into close proximity with the only other person inside, a mild-mannered 20-year-old boy sitting quietly opposite her. As they move through the fog, the driver sharply veers off the main road and heads down a desolate, unpaved route. Roshni protests, but the driver immediately becomes aggressive. Before things escalate, the boy steps in, suggesting they both get out immediately. They abandon the rickshaw, leaving Roshni entirely alone with a stranger on an isolated forest road. He calmly offers to escort her the rest of the way to the Ghat. In a moment of high stress, the brain prioritizes immediate safety over logic. Roshni accepts his offer without a second thought. She trusts him entirely, simply because he provided an exit from a dangerous situation. The boy safely delivers her to Sathani Ghat. Looking at the vast, rocky expanse and the steady flow of the river, Roshni finally feels a sense of relief. Her morning crisis seems to have resolved peacefully. But that comfort is short-lived. By 8 p.m., the safety of daylight is gone. Exhausted, Roshni climbs into a crowded return rickshaw to head home. Scanning the faces in the cabin, she spots him, the exact same boy from the morning. She calls out to thank him again, but he sits rigidly, his back turned, completely ignoring her voice. As she keeps trying to get his attention, she notices the other passengers staring at her. They aren't annoyed, they are terrified. They are looking closely at the empty space she is addressing. This is the exact moment Roshni's reality splinters. The physical world around her fails to validate her experience. To the dozen other people in that rickshaw, she is desperately talking to thin air. The psychological fracture follows her home. At midnight, secured inside her locked bedroom, her heavy wooden door begins to violently rattle. It shakes in its frame, seemingly struck by an immense physical weight from the outside. When her landlord checks the hallway, it is completely empty. Exhausted, Roshni falls into a feverish sleep, haunted by a recurring nightmare where a disembodied voice begs a single phrase, "Mujhe bachalo," save me. The next morning brings bright, reassuring sunlight. Roshni steps out onto her balcony and is stunned to see the boy standing right outside. She rushes down to confront him, and as they sit on a nearby bench, he speaks to her as calmly as he had the day before. Out of the corner of her eye, she glances at a parked motor scooter. Specifically, she looks straight into its circular rearview mirror. The scene reveals a horrifying paradox. In the physical world, the boy sitting next to her is completely unharmed. But in the reflection of the glass, she sees his true state. A corpse with a violently crushed skull, actively bleeding from a massive impact. Panic takes over. She sprints away from the bench. As the boy's voice calls out her name from behind, an old piece of folklore from her grandmother echoes in her mind. If a voice calls your name on an empty road, never turn around to look at it. We expect to be frightened in the dark, but true terror strikes when the broad daylight of a regular morning utterly fails to protect us from the supernatural. Collapsing outside her home, a severely shaken Roshni is taken to a local pundit, a Hindu priest who specializes in spiritual disturbances. The investigation reveals a tragic truth. The boy she spent the last 48 hours interacting with was indeed a real person, but he had died in a brutal traffic collision on that exact stretch of forested road days earlier. His trapped consciousness was caught between the earthly plane and mukti, the upper plane of spiritual salvation. It targeted Roshni because she was the only living person who acknowledged its presence. To sever this earthly tether, the pundit prescribed a rigorous 11-week cycle of Havan Savans and pujas, ritual offerings of fire and prayer meant to provide the spiritual energy the entity lacked. Once the 11th week concluded, the supernatural activity stopped entirely. The heavy presence in her room vanished, and the haunting ended abruptly. We instinctively view the unexplainable as a threat, but sometimes the entities that terrify us the most aren't malicious monsters hunting for victims. They are simply lost themselves, using the only tool they have left, fear, to ask the living for help into the light.